speaker for the same topic, reducing hospital-acquired infection by integrating futuristic strategies, is Mr. Gaurav Arya, Business Head for North and East India, ASP Johnson & Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pretty happy to be here. I'm the only person standing between you and lunch, so I'll be quick. Right, so we all work for, the hospital or the healthcare business which is an industry which is very, very important. But at the same time, hospital is a place where nobody wants to go. Is there anybody who actually wants to visit a hospital other than childbirth? So it's really a place. I mean, as long as we are working in this industry, it's great, and obviously it's part of our sustainability in our employment. But hospital is a place where nobody likes to go, right? And the last thing that any patient or a common person would want is to come back from a hospital with a return gift, which is hospital-acquired infection. You know how they've spoke about it. And these are a couple of the media articles that have appeared in the last couple of months about how medical tourism, which was and is considered the bane of healthcare industry in India, is now actually giving a return gift to patients, which is hospital-acquired infection, right? And becoming a major cause of concern. Policymakers in the US and other countries being concerned about superbugs emerging to medical tourists who visit India as part of their treatment. So it's a very important and it's a very concerning area of infection. And I come from Johnson & Johnson, a market leader in this segment. So hospital-acquired infection, I'll try to be a little more detailed and still ensure that I stick to time. It's an infection that a patient acquires who was admitted there for a different reason. So we all go to hospitals for some treatment or the other, and if we end up coming back from a hospital with an infection, that's typically called a hospital-acquired infection or a nosocomial infection in technical terms. There are various statistics to it, various data, both Indian and international data that is now started to track the infection rate. But there are typically 4 types of infections, but what I would try to cover here is the surgical site infection, which basically forms a large part of HAI. Almost 22% of all HAIs are because of surgical site infection. And basically this is resulted by the improper cleaning and improper sterilization of instruments which are used in a surgery. So becomes a major cause of concern. Roughly estimate by the International Nosocomial Infection Control Consortium, which is an international body of surgeons and microbiologists around the world, says that every 1 out of 4 patient in a developing country like India will end up having a nosocomial infection. That's pretty high, that's 25%. So while we all want to build hospitals that will give great patient care, but if we continue to have this kind of a problem, it is going to be a big disadvantage to not only our industry, but to all medical professionals and clinicians like all of us sitting here. This was a study that was conducted by INICC, which is on the Indian perspective. Again, surgical site infection has varying reports and varies from 5.5 to 15% depending upon the surgical specialty. And the overall incidence of SSI is 2 to 21%, much higher than what it is there in developed countries. This is a paper that was written and researched over by Johnson & Johnson internal medical affairs team. It talks about the epidemiology of healthcare-acquired infection. Again, if you see in terms of the total number of patients, how many of them actually acquired infection, and infection rate per 1,000 patient days, you would see very high rates. Not a very happy scenario. And if you were to look at surgical specialties, whether it is gynec, whether it's orthopedics, general surgery, all of these surgical specialties have considerably alarming rate of hospital infection, hospital-acquired infection. So what is the impact of hospital-acquired infection or a surgical site infection? obviously increased length of stay. The patient ends up staying there much more longer than what he or she would have preferred or wanted. Cost of care. If you know, and you might already be aware of, that cost of medical care in India typically is out of pocket for almost 70 to 80% of Indian population. So if the patient ends up staying longer in a hospital, he or she or the family ends up spending a lot more. Not to mention the suffering that the patient and the family goes through when instead of getting treated for a disease or illness, they actually now have to be admitted or readmitted in a hospital because of infection. So huge suffering, and in many cases it also leads to mortality. Antimicrobial resistance. Some of you may have heard of this term, becoming an increasingly used term in the medical fraternity. And just to give you a statistic, none of the big pharma companies in the world are working on any new antibiotic R&D. None of them are coming up with any new antibiotics. Because more and more, and as we go forward, because of easily availability of over-the-counter antibiotics, we are having a problem of antibiotic resistance in India. So more and more drugs are actually failing in causing antibiotics. So when such a thing happens, it actually leads to antimicrobial resistance. And obviously, brand and the reputation loss for the hospital or the healthcare facility, which is known to actually give infection for the patient that they get treated here. All of it actually leads to reduced patient flow. If you do not have patients coming to our hospitals, or tourists or medical tourists coming to our hospitals, how are we talking about, return ROI, or how are we talking about the CAPEX and OPEX and the recovery of that? Because in the end, we all want patients to get treated in the highest standards of care in our hospital or institute. Some of the reasons and the risk factors, obviously, they are multifactorial when it comes to hospital-acquired infection. There is a patient risk factor in terms of the patient compliance, age, morbidity, morbidity at the time of admission, and also at the time, there are operative risk factors as to what kind of protocols the hospital staff followed, whether how the nurses were scrubbing or the surgical staff was scrubbing, how the instruments were sterilized for the surgery. And this is an area that I particularly would like to talk about, which is inadequate instrument sterilization. That's an area which essentially causes 20 to 25% of the overall surgical site infection in the Indian scenario. And this brings to the question of where does it all originate from? It originates from a CSSD, a place which is considered the heart of any hospital, Central Sterile Services Supply Department. And what is it that we are doing not so right in a CSSD which is leading to all this SSI? Now, for those who are aware, CSSD is a place typically in a basement of a hospital, tucked away, which is where all your instruments which are required for a surgery get sterilized or disinfected or washed. The staff that works in a CSSD typically, there is no CSSD certification course in India. So all the staff that works there, essentially are people who started to work in a hospital, learned, got trained on the job, and have been moved around in various places in this to be able to service the CSSD, right? So and CSSD is typically considered a cost center. Why? Because it does not bring in revenue, does not bring in the monies for the hospital. And this is where all the malaise starts. It's kind of a dichotomy there because it's a cost center, only the basic facilities are provided there. Your steam autoclave is there, which is considered a must for every hospital for sterilizing instruments in a high temperature, ETO or ethylene oxide, which is considered one of the most prominently used technology in India, but increasingly becoming outdated because it's greatly hazardous. Ethylene oxide is carcinogenic, mutagenic, is very, very hazardous for the environment and for the staff who actually uses it. So the conundrum in a CSSD is that staff skill is a big question. The staff is getting trained on the job. There is no certification course over there. As and when, on a daily basis, they are learning something or the other as to how to do their work properly. Overcrowded operations. In a in a hospital which is running very heavily and there's a lot of surgeries that are happening, there is very little time for a CSSG or the OT staff to turn around instruments in between surgeries. What does that lead to is a compromise in an infection or a sterilization protocol. Something that we all are aware of, especially the surgeons or the clinicians who are sitting here. We have been using disinfectants, liquid disinfectants, to soak instruments in it so that they can be used for our next surgery. Something that is absolutely not recommended as far as sterilization protocols are concerned. So more and more as a hospital starts to work, more and more patients start to come in, the operation in a CSSD to turn around instruments starts to get overcrowded. There is no surveillance over there as to what kind of protocol is being used to disinfect or sterilize an instrument set. Cost, big concern. We can't have a CSSD becoming considerably costly as far as daily operations are concerned. So big concern in managing the cost as far as the CSSD is concerned. And compliance, surveillance. Many of us talked about NABH audits, NABH regulatory requirements as we go forward. But they're on a daily basis, as long as there is a surveillance or a compliance that is happening on a daily basis as to what kind of protocols the staff is using, we will continue to have a scenario where infections will continue to prevail. A hospital may be JCI or an NABH accredited, but that still does not rule out the possibility that an HI may occur there. It's very simple to a scenario where, I'm a diabetic patient, and my regular visit to my physician is due. So I love my sweets, I love my food. Just 7 or 10 days before my visit to the physician, I start managing my diet very, very well, so that by the time I reach the physician, my blood levels, my sugar levels are all in control. So typically an audit requirement or a compliance requirement in India runs in that fashion, where we want to do everything right before the audit is there, but as and when the audit gets over, everything comes back to, the way it was, which is square one. And this is the biggest problem, that how we can, on a daily basis, comply with the hospital or the auditory requirements, whether it's, industry protocols for compliance. So what are the possibilities? We talked about disruption in healthcare. How can we do things differently? We wanted to ask this question, and some of these questions are here for all. So can a CSSG cut costs? A repair cost of instruments, replacement cost of instruments, power, water. A steam autoclave typically uses 400 liters of RO water every day. And if you all know about the RO uses uses 30% of the water supply and converts it into an RO water. So what happens to the rest of the water? It gets rejected. In a country like India, and me coming from New Delhi, I think that's criminal to waste that kind of water going forward. There is a definite possibility of a disruption in this field. How can we have a hospital wasting almost 1,000 liters of water every day? A hospital spends a lot of money in repair of their instruments. Over a period of time, when the instruments get used during autoclave, steam autoclave, which basically sterilizes instruments at 140 to 150 degrees centigrade, the instruments go blunt, they lose their sharpness, the batteries, the power drills, they go blunt as well, and the hospital has to end up spending a lot more on their repair cost and replacement cost. Can the CSSD be integrated with the rest of the hospital and not remain standalone, tucked away in one of the basements of the hospital? Can the CSSG provide data analytics for audit, for regulatory, for compliance purposes, and make it more easier for the hospital to do documentation as and when required? And lastly, but not the least, can the CSSG be a revenue earner? Something that is difficult to maybe imagine at this time, but definitely possible. So this brings me to our latest innovation in this field from the ASP Advanced Sterilization Products Division of Johnson & Johnson. May I have the video, please? So I'm talking of the plasma sterilization technology, which has been there for some years. J&J has been a leader in this technology. We have almost 450 installations across the country as of date. To start with, plasma sterilization is one of the most advanced technology that emerged in the late 90s, and over the last couple of years, it has come to be greatly adopted across hospitals across the country. The sterilization technique uses hydrogen peroxide as a sterilant and is greatly effective across all types of devices, flexible endoscopes, scopes, cameras, cords, cables. It helps to repair cost almost by 58% when it comes to reducing repair. A 52% decrease in replacement costs for instruments, these are all definitive studies that have been conducted at different setups. Water costs, as I was mentioning, 190,000 liters in a year of consumption. That actually, for a country like India, which is criminal, actually gets saved. Power, which is required to run a ethylene oxide sterilizer for almost 10 to 12 hours, that gets saved. Energy cost, whether it's a steam, whether it's a EO, great amount of saving from that perspective. And other benefits, like for any hospital, CSSG or a steam autoclave or a EO requires huge amount of space. The plasma sterilizer that I'm talking about requires a space as big as a refrigerator in your CSSD. Reduced inventory, because when you have to run a standard methodology of sterilization like EO, you actually have to wait 8 to 10 hours. And in between, you require instruments for surgery. You would have to keep larger inventories of instruments to be able to keep using them. To have such a technology where you don't have to use those many sets of instruments, because you will be able to turn around your instrument sets within 30 to 40 minutes. And the video that you just saw, we have launched a 30-minute biological indicator readout, which is the fastest in the industry, meaning that now before releasing the instrument load for your surgery, you can be assured that the instrument was able to achieve 10⁻⁻⁶ sterility assurance levels, which gives the microbiologist, the medical superintendent, the CSSG head that much more assurance that the instruments were sterilized to the level they were supposed to before they were used on a surgery. Can CSSG be a revenue center? This was a question I wanted to ask, and I would like to present a case study here. It's about an 800-bed Indian multi-specialty hospital with 16 OTs and almost 50 surgeries a day. Having ASP Starart for 2.5 years, running around 7 to 8 cycles per day. Categorized load into 6 types. We identified cost to sterilize each type of load. Cost per type of load varies from around 250 rupees to 950 rupees. Patient was, as part of the sterilization charges, patient is now being charged basis number of each types of load that was being used. Patient charged basis number of instruments that were used in the surgery, load category along with different instruments used in the billing, and billing price for each type of load is now being pre-fed into the billing system. This is basis a lap chole or a hernia surgery. Obviously, the prices may vary whether it's a tier 1 or a tier 2, 3 ATCD setup, but typically it is around 2 to 3% of the average cost. So this is a revolutionary concept when it comes to maintaining the great amount of compliance in your sterilization methods and methodologies, and at the same time to be able to charge that cost if need be to the patient. Something that had never happened before. We all know that CSSG is important. We all understand the importance of it, the significance of it. But a time where a CSSG can not only become the most important place in the hospital setup, but also starts to contribute to the top line for the hospital. This is a little bit on the ASP access technology that you just saw the video about. This is a technology which integrates with the hospital HIS system and instrument tracking network. Instrument loss, instrument damage is a major concern for hospitals. So this integrated technology makes it easier for the CSSD and the microbiologist team to be able to track how the load is moving for each surgery between OTs. this technology and this information gets automatically documented and can be uploaded on the cloud, something that we want to do going forward for most of the hospitals, and that is something we all feel that technology has to be a great enabler rather than technology for the sake of technology. It seamlessly connects, correlates and communicates with all the departments of the hospital. So CSST does not remain a mere cog in the wheel, but it becomes actually an integrated place which communicates on its own. And it also allows a surgeon or a team to minimize human error. We all know that documentation, manual documentation in a hospital is a nightmare. You know, there are always chances of mistakes, always chances of misreporting. But with this kind of ASP ecosystem that I talked about, not only are you getting peace of mind and assurance of sterilization of instruments, but you're getting assurance of no mistakes as far as manual error is concerned, whether it comes to documentary requirements. Yeah. So this is in brief. I'm happy to take questions now or later during the lunch break.